Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this wonderful Wednesday in the Bay. Beautiful sunny day outside and zero wind. Thank you for joining me. This is session 3 of our series on improving mindfulness, most importantly, conscious self-management, which is a follow-on from our self-awareness series that I ran. Just a reminder, those series are all available in archive on my video section of my Facebook professional wall. Today we're going to be chatting a bit about emotions. And just welcome to everyone that's joined and everyone that's been joining me for this ride so far, and to all those that are new to join. And please feel free to pass on this information. I'm sharing it and I want everyone to know it, and I'd like this information to get out. So please share it on your walls and let everyone know that I'm doing this, and I will be doing it arguably until lockdown ends, and we'll see from after that where we go. So thanks. I see Barbara's joined us already. Hi, Barbs. So cool. So today we're going to be covering emotions. And I think just as a start, I want to chat a little bit about, as a preamble, so to speak, before we get to the slide that's on your screens. I just want to chat a little bit about what are these emotions and what are emotions. What's the simplest way of trying to explain emotions? So emotions are essentially chemicals which have developed out of our thoughts. So if you wanted to try and think about it, there's a wonderful book called Molecules of Emotion by a lady called Dr. Candace Pert. And she explains that the minute we think something, those thoughts straight away release chemicals into our bodies. And whether those chemicals, for example, like fear, would go to our amygdala, and that would send instructions to our adrenaline glands to release adrenaline. So emotions are essentially chemicals that start in the brain and then go and reside in the body somewhere. So unless we deal with those emotions can sit in the body, arguably, and make us very sick. They've even done some scientific experiments around this. There's quite a well-known one where they use EEGs to monitor chemical activity in the brain, and they put a person into this EEG machine, MRI scanner, and do this EEG and monitor the person's brain waves, and they'll put up, say, a picture of a snake. And if you went, oh, that makes me happy to see a picture of a snake rather than scared, the minute you see the snake, your brain area that signals fear will light up. And if you say you're happy, it will stay lit. But the minute you say, I'm scared, and you label that emotion correctly, that area diminishes in activity. So they arguably have said that they're now understanding what psychologists have always said. So when a psychologist says, how does it make you feel? It's important to name that feeling. And we've been talking quite at length about acceptance. Hi, Ray, and I see you've joined us. Thanks for joining. So it's quite important to understand our emotions. So, and then probably more importantly, to understand that the problem is not our emotions. It is our relationship to those emotions. And that's why we've been teaching mindfulness techniques, acceptance techniques of how to understand our emotions better so that we can have a better relationship with them rather than trying to avoid them. So one of the things that we do just in this preamble to emotions is it's important, and I did touch on this in another series, where I said it's important to name the emotion, to accept the emotion, secondly, and then to decide what you want to do with that emotion, and then to move on from it. Hi, Ashik. Thanks for joining. So it's extremely important. And then just another tip, because this is not part of this larger talk. I'm just giving you a preamble into, like I said, an emotional chat or a chat around emotions, is if you're struggling with self-control, or if you're struggling, I think we spoke about it yesterday, with this pause between stimulus and response, and struggling with self-control, so perhaps saying things that are getting you into trouble, even doing things that are getting you into trouble, a good idea is to think of a traffic light. Just the red, yellow, green. And red would always, if you're driving a car, would symbolize or signify that you need to stop. When it comes to self-control, this means stop and listen. Stop and listen first. Many people put think in there, but it's actually stop and listen. Listen to what the person's saying, because if we're going to judge straight away what the person's saying, we're going to put a whole swing on it, and it's going to come across all wrong. So just stop and listen to what the person has to say. Then the yellow or amber would signify we need to be careful or cautious. This in self-control means to think. We should stop and think, okay? After stopping and listening. Now we need to think. And then the green obviously is go, and that means you can say what you need to say now, because now you've given some pause and you've had some time to think about what you want to say, and then you can respond. So a great idea for self-control is a traffic light. So stop and listen, then think, then act. And lastly, in today's session, we're going to chat a bit about, like I said, the three groups of emotions, so to speak: high performance emotions, swing emotions, and then the blue emotions. And we'll chat a bit about that later. All right. So again, feel free to make any comments that you wish in the taper. Please say hi if you're watching. Nadine, I see you've checked in. How's it? welcome. And so, yeah, please make comments, inbox me, do whatever you need to do, but make contact. I enjoy seeing who's there. So great. So let's have a look at this little quote that's up on the screens called by Roger Ebert, called "Your intellect may be confused, but your emotions will never lie to you." Your intellect may well be confused, but your emotions will never lie to you. And there's a big disconnect for many of us between. Often, even when I'm doing trauma counseling, I ask people, let's talk just about your thoughts first, and then we'll talk about your feelings. And for so many people, the feelings and the thoughts are so enmeshed, they cannot separate the two. But they really come from two totally different areas, if we wanted to argue to put them in areas between our brain and our heart, so to speak. So our intellect can be very well confused, depending on, again, our upbringing, how many programs we've had from our parenting, from our social structures, from our schools, from our friendship groups, etc. But our emotions will never lie. So if we learn to trust our guts, and the only time our emotions can perhaps lie is if they've been tainted by our thought processes or by our judgments. But essentially, if we start trusting our emotions and trusting our guts, they will never lie to you, because it comes from a different base, and it doesn't come from a thought base or something that's stuck in our past. All right, let's move on to the next slide. So today we're going to be touching on, the title here is emotional intelligence, but this is not a talk on EQ. It's just rather a talk on becoming a bit more intelligent about your emotions, or a bit more aware about your emotions. So while improving mindfulness is helpful as an intervention between our emotional cues, that stimulus and response, it's not going to stop you from feeling angry, scared, insecure. And I don't even think we would want it to do it. That's why I asked this question: is it desirable? Is it desirable for us to stop feeling these things? And until you've done courses such as this that I'm running, or until you even start thinking about this idea, we all think it's a desirable action to not feel sad and not feel upset and not feel scared. But is this really desirable? What happens if there is a tiger around the corner? What happens if you're supposed to feel sad in that moment and we run away from it? And all that happens is we start pushing those emotions down, repressing them, suppressing them, and distracting ourselves, whichever way we use to try and get away from those emotions. And ultimately, those emotions just become bigger and bigger and bigger, and they start boiling up. In psychology, we have a thing called a diagnosis called conversion disorder. So when I mentioned that emotions can get trapped in the body, we have, it's called somatization, if I use big psychology words, which I don't really want to do that. But it's called somatization. Somatization is the changing of psychological stuff, which is happening in your brain, into physical symptoms in your body. And even though they're psychosomatic, those physical symptoms are very, very, very real. I can't express how real they are. So much so that in a diagnosis like conversion disorder, that psychological processes, those thoughts, can transmit into something that looks like an epileptic attack. And we call it pseudo-epilepsy. And the person has a seizure. They lie on the floor and they will be shaking as though they're having a real epileptic attack. But it's called pseudo-epilepsy because under an EEG, one can see that this person is not suffering from epilepsy, which means it has to be coming from a psychological component, which is normally your emotions. And a simple way of trying to explain this is, just as a volcano slowly builds up its lava inside, and just before the volcano erupts, there will be a lot of shaking and trembling, and this ground will start shaking, and eventually it blows its top. A conversion disorder, pseudo-epileptic attack, or a seizure brought on by emotions is pretty much exactly the same. It's the body's way of getting rid of those emotions that have been trapped for so long. And the only way to get rid of that is to start speaking and to start accepting your emotions. All right, so it's not desirable to prevent yourself or to stop yourself from feeling emotions. It's extremely important to connect with them, change your relationship, make friends with these emotions. Otherwise, they're going to become big bullies in your life, and those emotions are going to bully you from your subconscious. So what is the purpose of our emotions? So you might have heard that it said that all emotions are valid, which is kind of true. But it doesn't mean that you're in your rights to throw a temper tantrum just whenever you feel like it, because these emotions stem from a lot of from our internal environment, basically, and from our external environment. So, and they're bringing messages with them. If you've been part of these talks for a while, you would have remembered that we did a poem called The Guest House, and all of these emotions are bringing us something that we need to hear. What is the message that they're bringing? So it's extremely important to connect with them. So being able to feel and accept fear, for example, can be the difference between dying, if you're being attacked, rather than trying to just stay away from fear and pretend, oh, I'm not scared, I can just go walk through this area. So we need to understand these emotions. And So we're not going to be attacked by a wild animal. So we also need to understand that just because our brain says be scared, that doesn't mean that it actually is something scary, that there is something lurking there. And this is where we've explained about where mindfulness helps you just to create a little bit of psychological distance, so that we can remain calmer and make a different decision in our lives. I think it's a good juncture at this point to explain a simple exercise that sort of will illustrate what I'm trying to get across, or what I have been trying to get across for quite a while now. What I want you to do is, again, wherever you're sitting, lying in your bed, on your couches, however you're watching this presentation, just take your hands and put them like as though they're a book, like this in front of you. And I want you to do it. I don't think anyone's watching you. You're all watching me, so no one's watching you doing it. So I want you to take your hands, and I want you to stick your hands in front of your face like this, and to keep them there while I talk to you briefly. I'm taking my hands away so I can talk to you, but just to keep your hands in front of your face. What does it feel like when you talk to me in this way, or I talk to you? Does it feel distracting? Does it feel like it's a problem? Does it feel like there's a boundary between you and me, or a hurdle between you and me? Can you see me? Can you interact meaningfully with the world with your hands there? Could you do anything with your hands while your hands are stuck there in front of your face? Sometimes in my office, I'll have a person hold a board up in front of their face in the same way. But just keep your hands there. It feels terrible, and you cannot interact with me in any way with your hands in front of your face. Now what I want you to do is just to move your hands about a foot away from your face, sort of so that you can still not see me, but you can at least see sideways. How does that feel? This often feels a lot better. That's normally the response. It feels a bit better. I can look sideways now. I can at least see at 180 degrees. Can you do anything with your hands yet? No, the hands are still in front of your face. They're still causing a hindrance in front of me. Now just put your hands down gently on your lap and let them put there, just relax there. Not in book form, just relaxing on your lap. How does that feel? That feels a lot better. Now there's nothing between you and me, nothing stopping our communication. We have open communication now. Has the problem gone away? No, your hands are still there. They're still on your lap. But now you could pick up a toothbrush, you could pick up a cup of coffee, you could type onto your computer if you wanted. But the problem hasn't gone away. So if we use your hands as a metaphor for fusing with your thoughts or fusing with an emotion, or a judgment, so when this sits in front of your face like this, you cannot interact with the world because you cannot see the world other than your hands. Whereas if you put it here and you create a bit of psychological distance, now it's a bit easier to manage that process. And if you just put them down, let's say you're struggling with anxiety. The anxiety hasn't gone away. It's just now resting in your lap. Whereas if I've got to look at everything through this magnifying glass that's now right in my face, it becomes troublesome. So this hands in front of the face metaphor is a great way of just trying to understand thought fusion that we've discussed, and then just sort of disidentifying from that problem. Or the beach ball metaphor that we spoke about, allowing the beach ball to pop out of the water. If you haven't seen it, please you can go watch it on a video that's in my archive. But let the beach ball pop out. It's there. The problem is there. That doesn't have to stop you from living your life. Okay. So then we have these emotions called high performance emotions. Now at work, when you're trying to do a job, when you're trying to study, doesn't matter what it is you're trying to do, we have these emotions called high performance emotions. Emotions like enthusiasm, confidence, tenacity, optimism. And these are wonderful emotions for getting the job done. Another thing that's great about these emotions, and you can understand that, say you're enthusiastic about something. When you're enthusiastic, your brain is firing on all cylinders, coming up with hundreds of ideas. You're highly, what's the word? I can't think of the word right now. Creative, and it's a wonderful place to be. High energy. These emotions have got a lot of high energy, and you have a very wide focus. Okay, high energy, wide focus. So great problem solving, very creative, like I said. And this is great. There is also a small problem here, because could we have a problem with too much confidence or too much enthusiasm? And then it can become problematic, because now we become overconfident. We can also become arrogant, and we might also start narrowing our focus again once we become overconfident. So there's a fine line here about just exactly where my arousal level should be when I'm trying to cultivate these high performance emotions. And later on in the series, we will talk about how to cultivate them. I'm just introducing you to these things called high performance emotions at this stage. Okay, and then I'm going to move on from this. But so the important thing to remember is high energy and a broad focus when we're sitting with enthusiasm, confidence, tenacity, and optimism. Then we have the so-called swing emotions. These swing emotions are anger, frustration, and anxiety. They're called swing emotions because they also have high energy. The problem with them is they can go either way. They can either move towards those high emotions of confidence and getting things done and enthusiasm, or they can take you in the other direction. And most often, these swing emotions take you in the opposite direction, which we're going to just touch on now, the blue emotions. So swing emotions have high energy as well as the high emotions or the high performance emotions. However, do you think these swing emotions have a broad focus or a narrow focus? They have a narrow focus. Again, because it's just about getting out, stopping this feeling, making myself feel better, so that your focus narrows. And also, it's a stress response, very narrow. And I shared a story just after I first got these slides and I started presenting on this idea, and it was almost literally within a week. And it's a terrible story to share, and I really feel very sorry for this family, but it's an example, and it's an example that will stick with you. And it was about a fire in America. This lady, she was a single mother of 5 daughters, and she had varying in age from about 6 to 19, I think it was. And she had gone out with the 19-year-old to go watch a movie. When she came back, her house was in fire. And as you know, most American houses are made of wood, so this whole house was on fire. The people were around there as she arrived there, the fire engines, etc. She ran straight into the house thinking she had left the children there with her 16-year-old watching them. She ran straight in there looking for her children because she was obviously anxious and freaking out, but she had a narrow focus, which was just get my children out of this fire. And she ran into the fire, and she died in the fire. What she hadn't seen was that her children were already outside amongst the crowd. They were outside the house, but she wasn't thinking straight. She had this high energy from this swing emotion of extreme anxiety and panic, and ran straight into the fire and unfortunately died. And I share this story because it is a remarkable story, and it's remarkably sad, but it does share this idea of being careful about what happens when we panic or make rush decisions with these swing emotions. So it's important to understand, where am I with the swing emotion? It is possible to change them, and you'll see in our case study just now that when we do that, how once we understand what am I feeling, and a good example or another little exercise one can do is to say to yourself, the real problem is not anger, or the real problem is not frustration, or not anxiety, or not the person that you're projecting it onto. The real problem is. So I was thinking about some examples, or an example, and it might be, again, let's just say you're stuck in an abusive relationship, and you say, the real problem is not John. The real problem is my fear of leaving John, or the real problem is my fear of loneliness, or the real problem is my fear of not meeting someone else, or the real problem is me thinking this is the only person that will ever love me. That's the real problem. Of course, John is a problem. He's the subject, but there's something else that's making you stay there. So we can only do that when we become calm, or we step back, or we create some psychological distance. And that's what I'm trying to get you through mindfulness to understand. Okay. Then we have the blue emotions. The blue emotions are dejection, depression, disappointment. Anyone who's struggled with dejection or depression or disappointment will know that there is very low energy, sapped of energy, no energy at all, and of course, low focus again. And the worst case scenario, ultimately, if you struggle with blue emotions for a long time, is it can lead to suicidality, which is the ultimate narrowing of your focus, that I only see one output for me here, and that's to kill myself, excuse me. So it is extremely important to understand the low energy here, which is why we often recommend exercise as a way to start moving. Certainly, and I've worked at psychiatric clinics before. I did my internship there, and so depressed people would arrive and just want to spend the whole day in bed. Not allowed to. First thing you've got to do is get up, get your breakfast, put your makeup on, dress in your clothes, but you're not allowed to feel depressed or to stay in that position, because you've got to get moving, and movement creates movement. So we recommend exercise because exercise does a number of things. Obviously, it increases the endorphins, makes you feel better about yourself, but it also, they've now recently uncovered it takes the negative chemicals out of your bloodstream. So it's extremely important, and movement begets movement. So we want to create movement with these blue emotions. Okay, so just to recap again quickly, the high performance emotions, high energy, broad focus. Swing emotions, high energy, but a very narrow focus again. And we want to step back from the swing emotions, because we can use anxiety to benefit us, and we can use anxiety to become depressed. So we've got to be careful which way we swing those swing emotions. But if we are mindful, we can use anger and fear and frustration to overcome our obstacles. All right, I think I mentioned to you how anxious I was the first time I presented on Facebook Live. I had to learn some new skills, and literally the night before, because I don't waste too much time on doing things, and I normally wing it. And I did this with my anxiety. So my anxiety was high energy, but I used it to move into enthusiasm and confidence, etc. So to move towards high performance emotions. And then just in our case study today, to end off with, Cedric is a young school kid. He had made plans earlier to meet some friends at the park after school. So he wanted to meet with them, but he had a big test that he had to write the next day. So he used this enthusiasm to go meet his friends to power through his work, so that he could go play with his friends. And within, let's just say, it should have taken him 2 hours. He did manage to get his studies done in an hour. Was rushing out the door. He bumped into his dad there, and his dad called him upstairs and said, I need you to do some help with me quickly. I just need to ask you quickly about Pythagoras' theorem. And so Cedric started going, and he couldn't remember what Pythagoras' theorem was. And he suddenly realized that he actually didn't know his work. So thankfully for his dad, Cedric decided to go back inside and go and study a bit further before he went to go join his friends. So one would ask, was his dad's intervention good? Was Cedric's enthusiasm initially good? And the argument here is that he was over enthusiastic. So he did have a lot of energy to start studying, but his over enthusiasm made him overconfident, and he didn't actually know his work, because he tied in with that enthusiasm and overconfidence was also the anxiety of missing out on what his friends were doing. And that anxiety of missing out on what his friends were doing also narrowed his focus. Got to get to my friends, got to get to my friends, got to get to my friends. That he became overconfident that he knew his work. And his dad stopping him gave him a bit more anxiety. But that anxiety that his father showed him that he didn't know all his work, he was able to turn that anxiety into enthusiasm to do his studies and get his studies finished, so that he could move his way back. All right. So thank you for joining me. Again, I think at the end of all this, keep notes if you're going to stay with me through the series. And I think, or if you want to, if you've got burning questions, then inbox me by all means. Otherwise, we will have a Q&A session, I think, at the end of the sessions. So keep a notebook if you have. It might be a good way. I often say to people in my coaching sessions, the simplest way to do, if you want to keep a therapy book or a coaching book, is just to have a page and just break that page into 3 segments. On the top of the page, write what did we focus on today. In the middle third, what were some of my insights, so that you can go and reflect on these sessions. And then lastly, at the bottom, what actions do I commit to try and change my life? Otherwise, you'll be watching these sessions and going, okay, that was great. So I wanted to just mention something to you. It's just popped into my head to end off with. I often think of a triangle similar to Maslow's hierarchy with 4 segments. And if there were 10 of you watching, and I always challenge, and I use paradox here to challenge whoever's attending my sessions or my presentations or my talks, to think of these numbers and try and not be the bottom numbers. So out of the Maslow's hierarchy triangle with these 4 segments, if there were 10 of you, 4 of you will watch this presentation and be unmoved. There'll be no change. You will be sitting there like drones with not taking anything in. 3 of you are going to go, there was a lot of sense in what Greg said there. I think I might use it, okay, which I call awakening, all right? And then only 2 out of the 10 of you are going to arise or get out of bed and start making those changes in your life. And only 1 will ascend. 1 will then totally rework their life and become a totally different person at the end of an intervention like coaching or psychology or therapy, etc., or a talk that you've attended. So try and not be one of those 4 that are just yawning and kind of just passing time through the day. And I'm certainly not trying to insult anyone that's watching here, but I'm trying to challenge you with using this paradox. And it's just numbers, it's stats. 4, 3, 2, 1. Am I going to be one of the 4? Am I going to be one of the 3 that just go, wow, that's really interesting, but don't do anything about it? Am I going to be one of the 2 that says, wow, that's interesting, I'm going to do something about it? Or am I going to be the one that's going to completely transcend? Okay. So thank you for joining me. We'll see you guys again tomorrow. Please make comments. Please share my videos. Tell people about them. I'm getting quite excited about it. I love sharing knowledge. I love impacting people. And certainly one of my biggest missions is to try and make people into optimally functioning human beings. All right. Thank you for joining me. Have a great day.